Hi, good evening, everyone. So, brief introduction about me. I am working as a CSA for apps and infra in Microsoft, and I majorly work with customer sites. So, do the assessment related to security or like well architect framework. And for today's session, my topic is Kubernetes security. That will be including Azure specific tool as well, and some specific to the like open source tool as well. So in that, if for the 45 minutes, I will be driving the sessions. You can put your questions in the chat. And after the last 15 minutes, I am open to all questions. And if I'm not able to get all that in the like 1 hour, then I will take from the chat and reply over the email. So first is like Kubernetes is like a buzzword. If you are asking any startup or any developer who is just pass out from college, they will ask like, I want to work on the Kubernetes. So when it comes to Kubernetes, the technology also itself have a steep learning curve. But when it comes to the security, it's again a very steep learning curve on the security as well. Like there are so many layers in that Kubernetes when you are actually working your application there. So then like from the Kubernetes .io documentation, like Kubernetes Linux Foundations has like given some guidelines you should follow in your day-to-day life while working with the Kubernetes. So it is like first will be 4Cs. In that 4C, first outer layer is the cloud. That is like first layer of attack, you can say. And then it's like how in that particular cloud itself, how you are securing your servers, how you are securing that networks itself, and how you are securing your servers there, like how the patching will be done, how that update will be done, how the OS hardening will be done. So all that stuff that comes into the first layer, cloud layer, or you can host into data center as well. Then there also like you have to take care for this thing. Next comes to the your cluster layer. So cluster is like where you will be actually deploying your workload. So cluster, it can be managed cluster, like all the major public provider provide the managed services, the managed cluster. So in that you have less responsibility to manage like your endpoint hardwares and your nodes and your control plane, but you are still responsible for security in that, how you will be having network policies there, like which services can talk to which service, how the admission controller, how the you have defined the admission controller, like suppose where you can deploy the your particular images. So same stand for the authorization, so you are responsible for that. And if you are setting up your cluster on using kubeadm on the VMs, then you are also responsible for everything in the as a infrastructure as a service. So there you have to manage your OS and your network security of hardware, your VMs or infrastructure as well. So that applicable for all, like these things you have to manage, but just responsibility change when you go for the managed services or you are hosting your cluster on the AKS. Then layer part, the next layer comes to the container. So the how you will be protecting your container runtime. So Docker you are running, but in that also, how can you protect your like restrict images? So if you have just specific, you want to just know, want to deploy well tested image, then you want to be like restrict some policy or webhook, like I can deploy from this container only. So suppose you are working in an organization, so you don't want to be deploy any application outside, you are developing your image itself, then you can restrict that like restrict the policy your container that it can pick up images from this only. So in that way you are like if you go to the like open source images, so if you go the latest, so there might be some vulnerabilities in that. So in that way you will be restricting just well tested image will be deployed in your cluster. Then your supply chain, how you will be implementing your image vulnerabilities in that, and in that also like
Neelam,
how yeah,
can you
go
please
ahead.
put your presentation in a presentation mode?
uh, s- yeah, just a second. It's
Thank you
better
very
now.
much. Yeah, yeah.
So next is like supply chain. So how you are just preventing the privilege escalation in your container. Like if any container is not with the like some specific ports he is not accessing, some root access is not provided. So how you can prevent that privilege access in container. So that should you also take care. And sandboxing, like in the cloud, some public cloud provider provide the sandboxing, like within VM also you can do the nested virtualization, where you will be running your containers on the VM, but in the host you will not able to see any containers are running or not that. But like very limited numbers of public cloud provider are providing that, and it includes some latency as well. So you should choose the sandboxing very carefully when you need. If you it's very secure things you are doing and developing, then you can go for this. And the privilege is acceleration. So if you are providing like not giving the any specific to like system admin capability, time set, date set, so anything, make sure you are writing your manifest file in this way that it is following the benchmarking for that one. So next one is like your code part. So how you are actually deploying your developing your code. Suppose you are including third parties libraries in developing your building and developing your image itself. So how you are testing, that's it. So your testing should be more shifted towards the left. Like static analysis should be day to day part of your code. In that way you can just increase the like time to deliver feature and with the security as well. In this way, like suppose in your CI/CD build pipeline itself, you can use static image analysis tool like Trivi. So in that way, you can work on there itself before going into production. And others other security process for in testing also in developing also that will enhance your security. So that also comes the responsibility of your day-to-day developer team as well. And next comes to the if like how the responsibility gets shared if you are moving into cloud. So whenever you go into cloud, so cloud responsibilities are always a shared responsibility. So if suppose you are deploying your services into like on the your Kubernetes cluster itself on the infrastructure. So what your responsibility will be there? So there everything will be responsible for you. So in this like the highlighted blue portion is the customer responsible. So if you are deploying your infrastructure on the infra VMs, then for identity application network controls, like what port need to be allowed, what port need to be like for inbound access and outbound access, and what operating system I have to choose, like Windows OS and patching also, day-to-day patches I have to manage. But if you are going for patch services, then for within your like cluster, how the you will be doing the role-based access, or you will be using Azure AD for authentication, so that you can take. But behind that scene how that authentication will be taken care, that is the AKS responsibility. And application, like if you go to the AKS, that is a managed services or any public cloud or managed services, there like for the specific they gives you like you can deploy the their they have bench line, so you can deploy there. So they will highlight before deployment what is the issue, the security it can have. Then in the specific to your like API server, so that is not exposed to internet by default. So and nobody get access to root access of the controller as well. So in that way that is protected itself, your responsibility is half there. And network control within like you if you want to deploy your cluster specific to your private cluster, then you can deploy it into specific VNet and then just deploy the cluster as a private, so it will be just allowed within the VNet. So you can have like even you can deploy firewall as well for egress traffic monitoring. So there that control is with you, like how you will be doing, but within the VNet there will be no traffic allowed. And how you can do the within VNet also, so that that will be taken care by Microsoft. Like your VNet, then your cluster is within the private network itself. Operating system, so if you have like infrastructure, then there you have to like update and like upgrade your OS individually on each VM. But here from backend they update it, and like on day-to-day basis they update it, but some patches need the reboot as well. So a managed cluster is like it's your responsibility to schedule that reboot. They will not rebooting yours their self, but you have to check like when which sites like which of the nodes need the reboot after the patching. So there they have provided the CURD tool as well, and other public cloud provider also providing. So that is like your responsibility to apply that reboot. Then your patches will be taken care. And for the like in AKS, like what are the security? So in build securities, like from portal itself, you can just specific like who can access. Like suppose you want to access from your office, then and if there is one more site or your office location that need to access the cluster, then you can whitelist that particular IP. And network access to node as well, like you can have like your vnet integration within the cluster, so you will node will get having the public ip, private ip. For that, how you are accessing that node? So by default ssh is not allowed on the aks worker node, or even that one is the control node. So for that, you have to just allow that thing, and then you can disable it once it's not required on the manage. Like suppose you need to work on the ssh, so in that way you can just enable that service when you want. By default it's not enabled. So access to etcd cluster, so there you have everything like your like keys, secrets, your encryption keys. So there how you can like prevent that access. And then etcd encryption, that is like there you can use, and that is provided. But how, which encryption technology or like which type of encryption you want, that is your choice. And next is like api server metadata access, so that you have to prevent like who can access that one, but that is provided, like you can block that access. Next is like how the security is taken care. So this is like Azure specific baseline architecture for the security, advanced security it have. So for your cloud perimeters, whatever application that are hosted in your AKS that are behind the Azure application gateway with the WAF that work as an ingress controller. So whatever policies you want to have, WAF policies, it include the OWASP policies, and you can apply your custom role based on the geo restriction and specific IP request header. If you want to block that, that you can take care in the ingress itself. Before going to your traffic going to your cluster. Then for egress, you can have the firewall as well. Like, and you can have just whitelist. Like suppose your AKS cluster need to talk to the Azure files, Azure other PaaS services. Then you can list that FQDN services, and you can use tag to define the like your UDR from firewall that will be directing your traffic to the cluster, but that will be in the Azure backbone. It will be not going on the private. And third is like how can you secure this one? Suppose you want to like most of the people working from home now, so how you want to make sure that people are securely accessing? So you can have vpn gateway deployed in your hub network where you will be having firewall. Then they can access your site to site location, or you can have point to site vpn certificate generated from this vpn gateway, and they can securely access over the private ip. So in that way, you are securing your cluster parameter itself. That is like first layer of attack when you comes to the your ingress and everything and your day-to-day operations. And then whatever the images you are having, make sure you are using the private registries or the whitelist is registry, your private registry within itself. So next is like this is the one now comes to the cluster. So when comes to the cluster security, how can I make sure that what things I have to take care? So for that, like CIS benchmark, CIS Center of Internet Security has given some benchmarking. Like there is one very large pdf that you can download. It will give for each the component like control planes, like your api server etcd, your worker node, your control node, what things you have to take and what you have to take for the kubelet. So this will give you in this way like what you have to make sure it will give you fail pass when you run this assessment. So there are like CubeSat tool and CubeBench tool also there you can run, and it will give you detailed report for each the test. So there are tests in the that PDF. For each PDF like test case, it will give you it is fail, pass, and warning. And then for each like API server, there are like 26 tests. Then it will give you how many tests get failed, how many tests get like passed, and what you need to do in that way. Like suppose you have to change the in the API server, anonymous authentication is allowed. So that should be not allowed, right? So it will show you fail. If you have KubeADM tool, then you have to manually by default. If it's not like in the managed cluster, by default it is set. But if you are setting your own cluster, then make sure you run this and you will able to know that how secure your cluster is and what you have to do. So next is like how you can ensure in the AKS, like you are following your CIS benchmark. So I want to show you like this one. There is one AKS cluster I have deployed. So when you go there, so it will run the benchmarking, Azure benchmarking. So Azure benchmarking is the same way like the CAS benchmarking for each the service. And for the same for the like Kubernetes cluster or any other resource you have, it will do the like all the controls. It will analyze, like suppose this is my posture and vulnerability management. So this is part of one control in the CIS benchmark. Then it will analyze like what I am following in the sustain secure configuration for Azure services. So these things I am not following in the my cluster. So it is saying Kubernetes cluster should not use the default namespace. And as of now, if I connect to my cluster, I have deployed some ports there into default namespace. So I have deployed this. So that's why it's showing me that I am not following these things. Uses of host networking and ports should be restricted. Service should listen on allowed ports only. So I am using some service like the service which are not required. So suppose this one, this is like HTTP cluster. This service is not required in my application what I have deployed anyway. So it's saying like you should not use this one. You should disable this port and the service that is listening on that port. And running container as a root user should be avoided. So if I have done the policy setup here, but if it's asked me like you can deploy the suppose if let me show you, I have deployed one pod here. So it will give me error like this. You should not allow. This is having like this is a security context you have used privilege is equal to true. So like when I log into this container, I can get access to that VM and I can delete. I can do anything on that VM. Like I can stop any process. I can delete any container running on it. So that's why it's like just to secure your host and other services running on that host. It is like one of the baseline. You should not use that. So it will analyze your cluster and it give you the like what you have to do to fix this. And if you go to specific to your cluster as well, there also like some security recommendations comes, like where you stand in the security for your cluster. So it will give me detailed analysis. Like as of now I have this 16, and these 16 all of these are the critical one. So this one port should be allowed service. And then if I go to this, it will be again a like big list. Immutable root file system should be enforced. So whatever I am not following, and in my CPU and memory limits, I am not following. I have not provided in the that manifest file. So it is giving me all the recommendation there. It will be as per the benchmarking, but the CIS benchmarking and Kubernetes AKS benchmarking, there is slightly delay. Like it is continuously working. They release like every 3 or 4 months, but they continuously work as per the CIS benchmarking. So next is your comes to the like your cloud is secure, like you have provided secure access to your cluster. Then you have done the your benchmarking. Then we come to find out like these are the things we have to deploy. So how you can secure your access, secure access to your host. So first one is like API server access to be authorized by the IP. If you know the specific IP location or specific IP that need the cluster access, then do that like whitelisting. Second is like your SSH key based authentication be used instead of your like normal username and password. Most of cloud provider give you privilege to use the SSH key or the password, but go for the SSH keys. And next is like update patches on regularly, and for managed services, each public cloud provider provide the way how you can get monitor your patching. And for the like if suppose you are using Kubernetes dot 20 version today and they release something new, so by default Kubernetes support like 3 version, like it's on 22, then latest it will be supporting for everything that will be like 19. Just 3 versions are supported, back 3. So in that way you have to update your Kubernetes version as well. So if you are doing that, then make sure you are doing the head checksum for that binary. MD5 checksum should be done for the each binaries where from where you are downloading your like binaries that might be having some vulnerability. So make sure like if you go to Kubernetes documentation, they have provided MD5 checksum for each the binary, like for API server, kubeadm, kubectl, whatever you are doing. So make sure you verify that things. And for like in the how you will be like protecting your worker node, then move the like if you are using the kubeadm tool setup, then make sure you remove the kube config file, anonymous access and certificates based authentication, and remove read only ports. Because if by default in the kubelet if you go, then 10250 and 255 read only ports are allowed, and without even any authentication you can access them. So there you can get full details, what is the port running, what are the like metrics running on, what are the like uses of that ports. So it give a lot of details about that containers. So better you remove that ports from their config file itself. In managed services cluster like PaaS services, it will be already there. Next comes to the like once your host is secure, then how you will be accessing your cluster. So first will be like either you can use role based access. So my Azure also provide role based access, like who will be accessing cluster, and then Azure AD authentication for role based access within cluster. So suppose who will be accessing my namespace, who will be accessing particular port, and then we have pod managed identity also. Like suppose one of my pod that I like Redis cache or something need to like he have like auditing has enabled. So I want to access my storage to put that audit logs in that storage. So how I will be doing? So use post like you can assign Azure AD identity to pods as well. But as of now, this service is in the like itself in preview. Till then you can use service accounts, then in that way like you will be having secure, and you can just like control what access that pod need, like read only access specific for that they need, and what are the other services they can talk. Whatever you are using, use TLS for all API traffic. So by default in managed cluster it is taken care. And for the like within if you are setting your like cluster using kubeadm, you have to make sure you are following that one. And role based access and authorization, if you don't have pod managed identity and the cluster, then you can have the further role cluster role and role binding. So cluster role is at the cluster level, and specific what role binding do the it do like checks what you can do in the cluster. Suppose you are having a your name is like test, but that test user what can do in the like it can create cluster create the nodes, it can create the ports, it can create secrets, or he can just read only that things. So that thing you can do that granularity itself in the cluster itself. And then you can do like after like your authorization is done, but you again have want to have what with that authorization what they can do. So further control you can have over the webhook. So webhook will be like you will be deploying a like webhook server there, and that will be deploying like there will be policy will be defining. Then it will check, are you allowed to do this thing? Like suppose policy, I want to make so sure that like a like specific image with this tag, that my repository tag, public repository, private repository tag, that should be allowed. So you will be deploying a webhook mode, authorization mode, and then deploying a webhook server to verify that authorization. Second is like if you go to the Kubernetes cluster or any managed cluster, so by default, uh, you have access to the all the things. Like what is the secrets defined, what is the like uses and all that. So you should disable that. Like from cluster, if you go to any public cloud provider, if you go to this, then you can see the namespace. You can see the from here its configuration itself, like what are the secrets. I have blocked it by default, it's allowed. And same for the secrets, you can able to see this. So that is like if you are having access, you can delete it from here, right? And you can do modification as well if you have proper rights. So better you remove these things. So by default it's allowed, so you have to specifically disable this so that nobody can play with your cluster configurations. Next comes to the your network policies. Like within node control plane, you have controls, but within node, all ports can talk to each other by default. That is like your container system. Like all the ports can talk to each other. But how can you limit? Like suppose my DB or any specific backend server need talk to the specific to front end server, right? So I need talk to the other service that are running on that particular that cluster. So there you can control using the network policy. So you can have like specific like all ingress is allowed, all egress traffic is not allowed. So by default you can have that policy also if like specific to you want to have control. But if you need like just flexible control you want to have, then make sure within the namespace you are not allowing. So make sure you implement that network policies. Then quota and limit for service uses. So this is part of like within node also, like you specifying how many like containers you can run, and then specific uses as well. You have to limit what will be the like memory utilization and the CPU utilization. There you have to manage it. And then is comes to the node level firewalls. So node level firewall is just like NSGs in the cloud. If you comes to working in the like any like how you will be deploying at the protecting your virtual NICs of the VMs and then the particular subnet, then you can control the inbound and inbound outbound NSGs. And within pod also you can UWF firewalls, its name is that. Then you can specify like this port can be accessible by this IP, or this port can access specific to this IP range. That control also you can have at pod level itself. So this is like role-based access. So very confusing things comes like whenever you define any cluster role is like at the or a cluster level, and then you have just defining the role itself. So there is one termination like kind is role itself. That role is specified to the namespace only. You can create role specific manifest for the namespace level. So here I will be defining API groups. So what it can extend like apps, extension, networking related components, storage, authentication, certificates, what he can access. And then I will be defining resources. And in that resource also I can define particular resource. Suppose they want to like one team have to just work with the DB itself, then I can define that particular DB only they will be accessing. Then verbs, what what actions they can take care, get, watch, list. So whatever like based on the your the personas in the your working team, you can create different roles. Then you will be having extra layer, and even once you enable auditing, then you have clear picture with what role this role what people has done. And if you implement behavior analysis, then based on like what action they are doing, it should not be in there. So there you can further restrict these roles. And then creating this role, and with like suppose you are 5 readers, then you can bind it specific to that user. So suppose you want to specify this to the specific a role, a group, or specific to a user. Suppose you have one group in Azure AD, you have created a group like developer. So you can specify, instead of specifying each individual user, make Azure AD group and then assign that people into that group, they will be having access to that. So next is example of network policies, how you can access, define that within that port and network. So if you check this thing, so this will be like your DB or any policies you can. I am restricting my DB traffic. So there are two type of policy, ingress and egress. And if you are not defining ingress and just close bracket here, that means ingress only allowed, egress is not allowed. So there by default deny and allow policy, you have to check first one, that are like very restrictive policy. And based on that you can apply, like suppose I have make sure like ingress egress is not allowed, just ingress is allowed into DB. Then what I can do, I just specify policy type ingress, and then I can define the rules like from port selector API port only, the this one it will be not allowed. And if you specify the namespace here, then network policies, that will by default all the network policies are specific to namespace. Like their area of work will scope will be the particular namespace. And then you can define particular ports as well. And if suppose you want to have namespace as well, like instead of one port as well, you just want to specify 5 or 6 namespace, then you can specify that name as in this rule itself. And this is like your cluster hardening. So at OS level, like suppose you are doing the setup for the your KubeADM, or even in the like cluster for the managed cluster also. These things make sure that are implemented or not. By default, like some things are like your app armor, sec armor profile are enabled, but what control you want to in that security, there that comes your responsibility. So role based and SSH access for node, and only required packages. So it comes to the CIS benchmark section 2 on that what packages, like I was using HTTP D service, that was not required in any of application I am running. So it will give me that warning. So remove that particular port and that binary that you are using. And next comes to the your like sudoer, so who can run the sudo access. So if you are doing the suppose you are running AKS cluster, then you can just remove that, like who can have that. And password authentication also itself, there itself you can block it. And then you can just make sure that these kernel modules specific to this is like specific to Kubernetes guideline, SCTP and DCCP, that are very dangerous Linux module, you should not allow into your Kubernetes. So make sure various in the AKS cluster or any managed cluster also you are running, make sure you are checking these things. And identify, suppose it's development pod cluster, and you want to, you are not sure like what services are allowed or not, so you can just check your open ports. And for each the cluster, they have provided like how you are doing setup for your cluster, so they will provide the detailed list what ports are allowed, you can allow that only. So next is like OS level, like how you can have the specific to your OS security. So there are like security SecComs, so secure computing. So in this, like suppose what actions you can do. So there it will be checking, like there you will be modifying your profile specific to your profile, like what are syscalls you can allow, like you don't want any new file need to be created in your cluster, right? Or specific to any read file, you don't want to be any read call syscall need to be not executed. So there you can customize your like specific profile, and then you can put it, and then you have to put that onto particular node. So you can use daemon sets, and there for each the pod file you just defined what security profile you want to restrict. So if that profile is into disabled mode, it will be not executed. If one in strict mode and two is in filtered mode, so there when you are creating you can define which you want to have, so it will give you like what control. So by default you should use the like create two profile by whitelisted and blacklisted. So whitelisted is very like secure, so better go with the specific to the like blacklisted. So if you know this is calls I don't need, I'm pretty sure I'm not, this will be not required in my application, you can remove that. And then comes to the app armor. So what specific things you are allowed to do in your file system in your cluster. So in that way, suppose this in this like I don't want to allow system capabilities need to be set up, and I suppose I don't want to any write into etc file, as no one can write in the etc file, then I can write that specific, or even directory path also you can specify in that profile when you create yours for your organization. And then you can put into enforcement, complainment, and unconfined mode. So in enforcement mode, your every pod you will be creating, it will be analyzed. And again, this again also comes to the each node level you have to apply. So make sure you follow the daemon set. So it by default, any node get newly added in your cluster, it will get automatically created there. And it's next comes to the your container security. So in container security, you should have container vulnerability scanning and OS dependency security. So as part of your image building, you should scan your containers images. So by default, TV like CubeSec tools you can use static in your Visual Studio Code itself. And you can use like if you are using any managed cluster, like suppose you are using Azure Container Registry, there itself we have the Qualys vulnerability assessment inbuilt. It scan your images and just highlight into security center, just like AKS we have that things. It will highlight if you have any vulnerability in your image. So and you can create like alerts as well, like suppose you are building and tomorrow you just you are not sure like it was done or not, so you can set up an alert based on your repository and images you are pushing into container registry. It will show you, yeah, this vulnerability has been identified, and then you can take action before going into your next stage in development. Image signing sign and enforcement. So there you can have the like specific to your organization. Suppose like most of the cognitive service provided by the major cloud provider, like suppose form scanner, OCR. So in that way they are signing that, and they you can't change anything in them, even like or any package you can't do modification in them, because this is their signed images. Disallow privileges users, so you should not use privilege escalation true, or any system capabilities like Linux system capabilities with the like high privileges should not be allowed. Then use container runtime with strong isolation. So strong isolation is like your container sandboxing, that is like nested virtualization. There are like in gvisor kata containers. So Google is the one like who is by default providing nested virtualization in the cluster. If you want to use that, and application secrets management, so you can either leverage like your public cloud PaaS services, or you can encrypt you manually within your cluster itself. etcd encryption is there like within, and if you want to don't follow that, then there is like in Azure Key Vault. Same for other provider also, they have their like key and as certificate manager, there you can do the encryption. Next is the pod security policies. So in the pod security policies, I can specify, like I can again verify what is my pod following that particular rules or not. So suppose I just shown you like this in the cluster itself, it is giving me error. You are not allowed to run that container because there is one policy is not allowed in that thing. It's not allowed because validating gatekeeper.sh. So when you deploy the privilege container PSP policies, there you have to deploy the like webhook server, the, admission controller. So it will be checking your whatever manifest you are deploying. So it will first check it is as per that policy or not. If not, then it will not allow. And in this, like by default, if you run here, so it will give you detail what are the like controls they have done. These are example of like your admission controller, like we have already built like in the managed cluster, you have to just enable that add-ons and it will give you policies templates. There you can have, you can define like what volumes it can use, what are the capabilities they can use. So if my port is having any of these things that are not as per this, so it will like suppose this one is privilege is equal to true, run as user is like very privilege container, then it will not allow. And suppose I am using host directory, so it's saying host directory you should not use, I should use only persistent volume claim. So it will verify my manifest file before deployment, and if it's not there, it's not following, then it will not allow me to create the container. So this is example of sandboxing, how you can create, like this will be like within your host container, you will be having a other like a dedicated syscalls that will be going to your whatever container you are running on this, all the syscalls will be going through the this path, sentry, gopher, and then your host. So if you try to run, want to check the containers running on host, it will be not visible. So this is like just in the Kubernetes, you just create your runtime. Gvisor and handler should be runc. For kata container, it will be kata container. And by default, like there is the for Docker container, it is runc, run and just see only. So in this way, you can deploy your ports with the sandboxing. And but it gvisor need the container d as the runtime engine, so it in the most of the public provider after 1.20 it is allowed. So next is image security. Last part will be like you should use third party dependencies, how that third party dependency should be analyzed. So for each like there are software tools as well, and you can do that into part of your pipelines as well. And static code analysis like your sonar cube and white bugs, so that lot of that codes you can include into your built-in development itself. And then you can use the dynamic probe attacks. So suppose you want to check the SQL injection, so we have like within the Azure itself there is like lab get provided, and there you can access like what type of vulnerabilities you have in your application, and if WAP is like enabled, what will be the difference. Then there will be private registries. You should always use the private registries, and whatever data you are using, instead of mounting that into image, so that you should put as a secrets. And within the image also, like how can you ensure your image is secure? So that way deploy, keep your image size small as possible. So if you want to have you want to use the run command, so instead of running that run command, try to install that dependency with one run command. Don't use the root logins. Just create the users within that image that are specific to do that work only. So in that way, you are just minimizing your image secure, like maximizing your image security with while building the image itself. And then if you are taking base image, then make sure you follow the proper version, like suppose ngx 1.18. So if I know I need be needing this for my development, then base image, instead of using latest tag, you should use that proper version itself mentioned in that image itself. In that way you can have you can verify that image as well. So there are like image security things. So kubesec is like open source tool. There you can report run based on the your deployment, your binaries and your file. Suppose you have lot of manifest file and you want to run the analysis, you don't have any built pipeline, then you just run the static analysis. It will give you for each image, it will give you score out of 30. So where you are failing, so it will give the detailed scores and why you are failing, what you have not done. It's saying me selector should be privilege true, so that's why I am failing. Then it will give for each the failure, it will give you points. And then another tool you can use is Trivi. If you have not like your proper container registry pass like the Qualys, then you can install Trivi, open source tool. This is again open source tool. There it will give you your image severe like proper like vulnerabilities in terms of like high, low and critical. And then you can, it will give even like if where you can remove it. So if you have proper version, make sure you will test that base image as well, where whatever you are doing that. And if you are just customizing yourself, then in that customization also you just run this analysis, and that can be part of your development itself. And then last part comes to the monitoring and auditing. So monitoring, like you have implemented everything in your cluster, but how you can ensure that. So make sure you have proper monitoring. So most of the public cloud provider provide the detailed dashboard for the monitoring. So it will give you some cluster specific like your reports, nodes, controller, containers, and this will be real time. So that will be helpful. Then you can have the auditing enabled. So auditing will be like whatever the users, like suppose on the your specific production namespace, you want to analyze what users has done, right? You want to analyze like which user has done what, anyone deleting that pod or anyone changing any image. So there you can enable the policy, and it will be just that policy the logging and you will be like providing your location path where your logs get saved. And based on that you can do the behavior analysis as well. And there is one like open source tool Falco that you can use for behavior analysis as well. There you will be, it will be giving like this whatever like controls you will be defining in that, it will highlight that thing. You can specify within that like location in the cluster, or you want to transfer that logs into another one like outside the cluster storage, then there you can run the analysis. So I'm done. I'm open to questions now.
Uh, I have two questions, Neelam.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, so my first question is regarding root user. So we have defined policy in Azure policy that our containers must not run under root privileges, right? Now my
Yes.
question to you is, in our case, in Docker file we have defined user as node because we are using node. Now, and since we have defined this thing in our Docker file and not in the security context of a pod policy, so from where policy will read, because we are getting policy failure because of that. If we have not
So
defined security context just in a Docker file, will it suffice?
security context you have not defined, right?
Right. We have just defined user in a Docker file. So when you are creating container out of that image, which is based on a Docker file where we have defined a user, then
Okay.
it is running under context of that user, not the root.
So in the image itself, you have specified what user should be used, right?
Right.
And then you have not specified in that manifest file and it is
Absolutely.
failing.
Yes.
Yes, then you have to define that into its managed cluster or like KubeADM cluster.
It's AKS
Okay,
managed.
so it will fail.
Okay, so we have defined security
Yes.
context anywhere,
So
right?
if you go to this, if policies, let me show you that policy specifications of this one. If you go here, so there will be definitions.
Right.
What definitions you have? So I have applied these two things for the cluster. A second. Yes. So this is the initiative. It will analyze from this one.
Sure.
Image, it is not analyzing. So it will, for each port, it will be analyzing this.
Okay. Sure. Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
My second question is, so you said about security patches. So suppose since AKS, the master node is managed by Microsoft, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Right.
nodes where the worker node will be managed by us, right? So if there is a security patch that needs a reboot, how a
Yeah.
customer will know that there is a security patch needs to be applied and it will need a reboot? How we would know?
Okay. Let me show you. I have deployed one. There is like cut, right? If you go to this one namespace, there will be daemon sets running on the each VM.
Okay.
Okay. Just.
Minus n.
Yeah. So I have 6 nodes. Three I am using for system and three I am using for the my development, like
Right.
application. So there in each node there is one container running, and in container we have one file that you have to check. I will give you that path
That will be great. So
documentation that you have to analyze. It will give you the any if then reboot is pending, then there will be that in that file list when the
but
patch was done and why reboot
right.
is required.
But do we need to go there regularly to see it, or there can be an alert mechanism where we can get an email? Because going there time and again may not be a feasible task all the time, right?
Yeah, you want like any alert need to be set up for that.
Because the security policy, we don't want to be
Yes, right,
delayed,
right,
right?
right. It should be there itself in the like just like other policies. There should be one policy and alert.
Yes.
There you can get notification. Okay, that part is not yet, but I will check with PG team if it can be done.
Sure. Cool. My last
Yeah.
question, since we were trying to do this image signing thing, what we found was, as your container registry, there is no way in it to see that the certificate that has been used to sign image is a valid certificate or not. It will just store the image which is signed, not more than. For example, if I have signed my image with my own personal certificate, not the company certificate, and
Okay.
then push that image back into ACR, it will accept it as is. Rather, rather than giving me error that, oh, this is not the valid certificate, or you should not use a self-signed certificate for this. So with that perspective, we are not seeing a much benefit out of image signing. Just it can be a good tick mark for compliance thing, right? But from security perspective, we are not seeing that much benefit. Do you guys use image signing?
I have not seen that use case. Like this was just for cognitive service only. That was
Okay.
Microsoft only. But you
Mhm.
can do the key vault integration with your
Yes.
that
Yes,
one.
we are doing that. We are doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, we are doing
In
that.
that also it's not verifying.
No, it will not. So there is no way in ACR to verify your certificate. It will store as is. It's just a storage.
Okay. And
ACR is
from
just a
key
storage.
vault,
Yeah.
So better what control you can do, put that particular your organization enterprise certificate into key vault and then do the signing with that certificate, and don't allow anything need to be changed. Like for that particular certificate itself, there are like specific access you can have, get list or a date update or owner access, so that you can manage for that policy. Make sure that that can be done by that only, that authorized
Right.
people only.
Right. That we need to do, but the only thing which was missing is there is no way in ACR to do that verification for us.
That certificate is by authorized
Yes,
people only.
yes,
So,
yes.
yeah, but that is there itself. Like if when it comes to the cloud responsibility model, then for your data, like who is the authorized user of that, like you will be deciding who will be the owner and owner will be putting that right certificate. So that is your responsibility.
Right, right, right. Do you have any say on service mesh part? Because that
Yes.
also
So
has,
Istio,
yeah,
yeah, Istio is there. Like you can deploy Istio very well,
yes.
but
One
it's in
last
preview.
question for yeah, one last question for that. So since when you apply Azure policy on AKS, it is applied at a pod level, right? Now, if that pod has two container, one is an application container, one is a sidecar, right? It
Yeah.
will apply to both. Now, suppose the policy is for CPU or memory resources, right? You have defined for your application, but you have not defined for STO sidecar. Then policy will fail you because it is not say it is there is no way to tell policy that look for application container not for the sidecar
Yes, right, right. That is at pod level. Policies are at pod levels, not
pod
at
level,
container
right?
levels. Yeah,
Right. Cool. Thank you very much, Neelam.
yeah. Thank you. Any other question?
Not now, but I will ask you later.
Sure, sure. So Istio has been deployed and it is working. Like I have virtual services there and rules defined.
Right. The only guidance I'm looking for is the upgrade path because I see AKS is having regular updates. Every month it's going one version up, right? And keeping up
Yes.
with that in our production environment is kind of making me nervous, right? So I just need to understand how to make it error proof so that even we can regularly upgrade
Yeah,
our
you can
AKS. Yeah,
regularly update, right?
yeah.
Okay, I will check and update you for this thing.
Sure, sure. And I know
Any
Microsoft is
other?
also working on this open source mesh OSM, right?
Yeah, service. Yes, that's
Yeah, so
also
we are
in.
waiting for that.
Yes. Okay. So mostly this Istio and that all are in the preview. Most of the like high security features like your virtualization, nested virtualization, containerized, container D is supported now, but
Hmm.
nested virtualization is on D and E series is supported. And then comes to the your port security policy that is also it's in the preview. So you can use specific like specific to some regions only that you have to register. So like most advanced security things are in preview that will be available within next 3 months.
Right, right. On your screen you're showing CURD, right? So my understanding
Yes.
is with this pod, I can see in a file whether there is a reboot required or not. So
Yes.
customer responsibility is just a reboot. Actual
Yes. Yes.
patch installation is Microsoft's, right?
Yeah, so they are not rebooting because they are not sure what is your application use time, right? When you
Right.
want to scale. So based on that, you can schedule your reboot. Like you want to into night time or a weekend time when your application is not used so much, then you can do the reboot.
Sure.
Otherwise, they can do, but that is not advice as per the like your
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
application
I don't want to
uses.
down my production. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. We have just 1 minute left, and Again, Neelam, thanks for the wonderful session and thanks for answering the
Thank you,
questions.
everyone.
We're happy to have you here.
Thank
And
you,
I'll
guys.
be stopping the recording now.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.